Most people live as if the world owes them something. They believe life should be fair, that fortune should bend to their desires, and that suffering is somehow a mistake. But the Stoics saw through this illusion. They knew the truth: the world is not built for comfort. It is built to test you. Every insult, every loss, every failure is not an obstacle. It is a teacher. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Imagine if you truly lived by that principle. Instead of cursing the difficulties that confront you, you would turn them into fuel. Instead of breaking under pressure, you would grow stronger because of it. That single shift in perspective is one of the most powerful weapons a Stoic possesses, and it is just one of the lessons we will explore here. In this lecture, we will uncover 7 timeless principles that separate the ordinary from the extraordinary. They are not comfortable ideas. They demand self-mastery, silence, discipline, and a ruthless acceptance of fate. But if you listen closely, you will see that they are the very tools you have been searching for. The tools to remain calm in chaos, steady in loss, and unshaken even when the ground beneath you shifts. And here's the truth: once you understand these laws, you can never go back to living blindly. You will see the world differently. You will see yourself differently. The same storms that break other men will become the winds that carry you higher. So I challenge you, stay with me until the end. If one of these Stoic laws strikes a chord with you, share it in the comments, write the words, let them burn into your mind. And if this way of seeing the world speaks to you, subscribe to Stoic Focus, because together, we are building a community of minds that refuse to kneel before chaos. Now, let us begin. Ask yourself this: what is power? Most people point to wealth, status, or influence over others. They imagine that the man with the loudest voice or the most followers on a screen must be the one in control. But the Stoics rejected this illusion. They understood that what appears powerful is often fragile, and what looks quiet often holds unshakable strength. True power, they taught, is not control over others, it is control over the self. Epictetus, born a slave and later revered as a philosopher, said it clearly: "No man is free who is not master of himself." The statement cuts deeper than most realize. You may think yourself free because you live without chains. But if anger provokes you at every insult, if greed dictates your choices, if fear paralyzes you when change comes, then you are enslaved not by others, but by your own impulses. Look at the modern world. How many leaders, celebrities, or executives collapse not because their enemies defeated them, but because they could not control themselves? A single scandal, one rash decision, one unrestrained indulgence, and everything they built falls apart. They had authority over thousands, but no authority over their own minds. They ruled empires, but not their appetites. And in the end, their lack of inner control destroyed them more thoroughly than any rival could. Now contrast this with the Stoic perspective. Imagine a man who loses his job, yet does not lose his composure. He acknowledges what happened, assesses what can be done, and acts with clarity. Another man, faced with the same loss, collapses into despair, curses fortune, and wastes weeks in bitterness. Both suffered the same external event, but one remained sovereign within himself, while the other surrendered his inner throne. This is the difference between weakness and true power. Marcus Aurelius, ruling the vast Roman Empire, reminded himself each morning that men would be deceitful, selfish, and unjust. Yet he wrote, "They cannot harm me, for I will not let them drag me into ugliness." Think about that. The Emperor of Rome did not measure power by how many armies he commanded, but by his ability to keep his character intact when surrounded by corruption. That is inner control. That is the only power no enemy can take from you. This law demands constant practice. Inner control is not won once and kept forever, it is forged daily. Each insult you choose not to answer in anger is training. Each temptation you resist is reinforcement. Each fear you face calmly is a stone added to the fortress of your soul. The world will keep testing you. and each test is an invitation to either lose control or strengthen it. Consider a story. A young man, humiliated in public, clenched his fists and nearly struck back. But he stopped, remembered Epictetus's words, and instead asked himself, "What is within my control here?" He realized his body and his tongue were his domain, so he turned away. Days later, the one who mocked him was caught in his own lies, exposed without a fight. By refusing to react, the young man not only preserved his dignity, but gained respect. His restraint was more powerful than any outburst. This does not mean apathy. Stoicism is not indifference to life. It is clarity about where your strength lies. You still act, you still strive, you still pursue justice and excellence. But you do so from command of yourself, not from slavery to impulse. The Stoic warrior does not charge blindly in rage. He steps forward with reason, knowing his actions serve a higher purpose. Here is the paradox when you stop trying to control the world and focus on controlling yourself. You actually gain influence. People trust the man who cannot be rattled. They respect the one who remains calm in crisis. They follow the one whose decisions are steady while others panic. By mastering yourself, you indirectly master your circumstances, because the world bends around the man who will not break. So remember, true power is not about bending others to your will. It is not about applause, wealth, or dominance. These can all be taken. The only power that endures is the one no tyrant, no enemy, no storm can steal the power over your own mind. Rule yourself, and no one else can rule you. Fail here, and nothing else will matter. This is the first law of Stoic mastery. Power is inner control. It is the throne within you. Guard it, rule it, and from that throne, you will face the world untouchable. In a world addicted to noise, silence has become unbearable. Most people fear it. They fill every moment with chatter, with distractions, with constant streams of information. But the Stoics saw silence differently. To them, silence was not emptiness, it was discipline. It was clarity. It was strength. Epictetus gave a simple command: be mostly silent, or speak only what is necessary. He was not telling his students to retreat from the world, but to recognize the danger of careless words. Every unnecessary statement reveals too much. Every impulsive remark gives away control, and every attempt to impress through speech betrays insecurity rather than confidence. Consider how most people behave in conversation. The insecure rush to fill the space, eager to prove their intelligence, eager to be liked. Yet in their rush, they reveal their weaknesses, they exaggerate, they contradict themselves, they promise more than they can deliver. The wise man, by contrast, holds back. He listens, he waits, and when he finally speaks, his words strike with weight, precisely because they are rare. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor surrounded by flatterers and advisors, reminded himself constantly not to waste words. In his meditations, he wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Such a standard cuts away 90% of the noise that fills human conversation, and what remains is clean, sharp, and undeniable. There is power in restraint. Imagine a heated argument. One man yells, gestures wildly, drowns the room with noise. The other stays silent, listening carefully, his calm presence pressing heavier than the storm of words. The crowd does not remember the shouts, they remember the one who remained unshaken. His silence was not weakness, it was mastery. A story illustrates this well. A Roman general once faced a rival who taunted him publicly, mocking his strategy, trying to provoke an outburst. The general did not reply. He simply looked at the man and walked away. Later, when battle came, his silence proved prophetic. The rival's overconfidence led to disaster. The general's restraint, his refusal to waste words, preserved not only his dignity, but his advantage. Silence is not passive. It is active control. Each moment you choose not to speak, you choose to hold power rather than give it away. Every pause is a chance to observe more deeply, to understand motives, to see the cracks in another's armor. And in those cracks lies the opening for decisive action. But silence alone is not enough. It must be paired with intention. The Stoics did not advocate muteness, they advocated wisdom. Speak when words can heal, when words can instruct, when words are necessary for justice, but when words serve only vanity, anger, or gossip, hold them back. In this restraint, you elevate your speech so that when you do speak, others listen. Seneca warned against the trivial chatter of the crowd. He wrote that much of human speech is wasted on gossip, speculation, and distraction. The Stoic avoids this not because he is aloof, but because he values his attention too highly to squander it. By staying silent, he protects his mind from being consumed by what does not matter. There is also a deeper layer of silence toward yourself. How often do we torment ourselves with endless inner dialogue, ruminating, replaying, worrying? The Stoic practice of stillness trains us to quiet that inner noise. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that opinions, fears, and judgments are not reality. They are stories we tell ourselves. Silence the unnecessary stories, and the truth of the moment reveals itself. So, how do you practice the wisdom of silence? Pause before speaking. Ask, is it true? Is it just? Is it necessary? If not, remain silent. Listen actively. Use silence to gather knowledge others are too careless to hide. Choose your words carefully. When you do speak, let each phrase be deliberate, like a sword strike, not a flurry of weak blows. The modern world equates visibility with power, constant noise with relevance. The Stoic knows the opposite. The less you speak, the more your words carry weight. The quieter you are, the more others reveal themselves. This is the wisdom of silence. It is not absence. It is presence without waste. It is the calm voice in a storm of noise. And in that calmness lies authority, respect, and unshakable strength. Freedom. It is the word most people worship, yet the reality few ever achieve. They imagine freedom as the ability to do whatever they want, whenever they want, to indulge, to consume, to avoid effort, to chase comfort. But the Stoics understood that this so-called freedom is nothing but a different kind of slavery. For the man who cannot command himself is always commanded by something else. Seneca declared, "No man is free who is a slave to himself." Look around you, and you will see what he meant. The man who cannot rise from bed without pressing the snooze button 10 times is a slave not to chains, but to laziness. The one who cannot stop drinking, gambling, or chasing pleasure is a slave not to a master, but to desire. The one who explodes in anger whenever provoked is a slave not to an enemy, but to his own temper. They live with the illusion of freedom, but their lives are controlled entirely by impulses. Now consider the disciplined man. His freedom is not loud, but it is absolute. He can wake when he decides to. He can work when work is needed. He can endure hardship without collapse. He may enjoy pleasures, but he does not need them. He can walk away from indulgence without regret. He is not commanded by moods, cravings, or fear. He is commanded only by reason. That is true freedom. Discipline may appear restrictive at first. The lazy see it as chains. But the truth is, the opposite discipline is what breaks chains. Each time you choose the harder path, you train yourself to endure. Each time you say no to distraction, you sharpen focus. Each repetition, each act of restraint forges a man who is not controlled by the world, but who moves through it as master of himself. Think of the soldier who drills endlessly, repeating the same motion until it becomes second nature. To the outsider, this looks like imprisonment, marching, turning, repeating. But when the chaos of battle arrives, the soldier's discipline is his survival. He moves with precision while others panic. His freedom is purchased through his training. So it is with life. Discipline may feel monotonous in peace, but it becomes liberation in crisis. Marcus Aurelius, burdened with the weight of empire, never excused himself from discipline. He wrote at dawn, "When you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I am rising to do the work of a human being." Even the most powerful man in the world reminded himself daily that discipline, not indulgence, is what makes life worth living. Without discipline, even an emperor is a slave. With discipline, even a slave may be freer than kings. Consider a modern story. A man addicted to scrolling on his phone decides to change. He sets a strict rule: no screens before noon. The first days are torture. His mind craves the stimulation, the constant drip of distraction. But he resists. After weeks, he begins to notice something: clarity in the mornings, focus in his work, peace in his thoughts. What felt like a restriction at first revealed itself as freedom. Discipline broke his chains. The Stoics did not glorify suffering for its own sake. They glorified discipline because it makes a man sovereign over himself. You will never control fortune, fate, or other people. But if you can control your actions, your habits, and your desires, then you possess a kind of freedom that nothing external can destroy. So ask yourself honestly, where are you undisciplined? Where do you betray yourself? Every wasted hour is an act of surrender. Every indulgence without restraint is a chain you willingly fasten. If you wish to be free, you must first learn to command yourself. This is why discipline is not the opposite of freedom, it is its foundation. To the undisciplined, discipline feels like suffering. To the Stoic, discipline is liberation. For when you can command yourself, nothing outside you can enslave you. This is the third law of Stoic mastery: discipline is freedom. Practice it ruthlessly, defend it daily. Because the man who masters discipline does not need luck, does not need permission, does not need rescue. He needs only himself, and that is enough. Most men chase respect in the wrong way. They think it can be purchased with wealth, demanded with authority, or forced through fear. And for a time, they may succeed. Money can buy applause, status can earn flattery, fear can make men obey. But the Stoics knew this respect is fragile. It disappears as quickly as it arrives. True respect, the kind that endures, can only be earned one way: through virtue. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Simple words, but within them lies the foundation of respect. Virtue, for the Stoics, was not abstract morality. It was practical excellence. It meant courage in the face of fear, justice in the face of temptation, temperance in the face of desire, and wisdom in the face of uncertainty. A man who consistently embodies these four virtues commands respect even from those who dislike him. Contrast this with the man who seeks admiration without virtue. He flatters, he compromises, he bends his principles to be liked. And yes, people may smile at him. They may call him charming, but deep down, they do not respect him. They know he will bend again tomorrow. The applause he seeks becomes his prison, and when it fades, he is left with nothing. Now imagine the Stoic leader. He does not beg to be liked. He does not bend to opinion polls or gossip. He lives by principle, and his life itself becomes his argument. Even his enemies must admit his strength. They may oppose him, but they cannot dismiss him. His respect is not borrowed. It is carved into the very structure of his character. Consider a story. Cato the Younger, a Roman Stoic, was known for his incorruptibility. When others enriched themselves through bribes, Cato refused even the smallest gifts. His colleagues mocked him for being rigid. But when the time came to choose who could be trusted, all eyes turned to Cato. His virtue was his shield. His integrity, even when unpopular, earned respect that no wealth could purchase. Respect through virtue is not always comfortable. It will cost you friends who prefer compromise. It will separate you from the crowd that chooses convenience. But it also makes you unshakable. When your respect is built on virtue, it does not vanish with fortune. It cannot be destroyed by rumor. It does not depend on approval. It belongs to you and to the truth of how you live. The Stoics remind us that reputation is not fully ours. It is the judgment of others. But character is always ours. If your character is strong, your respect will eventually follow, even if slowly. If your character is weak, your reputation will eventually collapse, no matter how carefully you polish it. So how do you practice respect through virtue? Live consistently. Let your actions match your principles, even when no one is watching. Choose courage over comfort. People respect those who face hardship without complaint. Be just, even when it costs you. Fairness in difficulty proves more than generosity in abundance. Speak with honesty. A man whose word is reliable becomes a pillar others lean on. The weak will say that virtue is outdated, that respect today is earned by spectacle, wealth, or manipulation. Let them chase shadows. Their respect will vanish with their fortunes. The Stoic builds his respect on something indestructible, his own soul. This is the fourth law of Stoic mastery. Respect is earned through virtue, not demanded, not purchased, not forced, lived, and once lived, it cannot be taken away. Every battle in life begins long before the first strike. It begins in the mind. The Stoics understood this with piercing clarity. They knew that while men spend their energy trying to control circumstances, the true war is always internal. Fear, anger, envy, despair. These are the real enemies. Conquer them, and no external opponent can defeat you. Fail to conquer them, and you are already lost, even before the fight begins. Epictetus taught his students a simple but radical truth. Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of things. Events themselves are neutral. It is our judgments, our thoughts, our stories about them that create suffering. A storm does not ruin your life. Your belief that storms should not exist does. An insult does not wound you. Your decision to see it as an attack does. Poverty, sickness, loss, these are hard, but they do not control your mind. Only your interpretation does. Imagine two men facing the same hardship. Both lose their wealth. One curses fate, blaming others, drowning in bitterness. The other accepts reality, asking what is still within my control. He chooses to rebuild, calmly, steadily. The same event, two different outcomes. Why? Because the battle was fought and won in the mind. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. As emperor, he faced wars, betrayal, plague. Yet he insisted that none of these could touch his soul unless he allowed them to. His throne was not his palace, not his armies, it was his mind. And from that throne, he ruled himself. This is the warfare of the mind, to stand guard at the gates of thought. When fear tries to enter, you question it. When anger rises, you pause. When envy whispers, you silence it. You do not let every impulse march in freely. You decide what gains entry and what is turned away. Most men live with an undefended mind, open to every rumor, every insult, every distraction. The Stoic builds walls, not of stone, but of reason. Consider a modern example. A man is insulted publicly online. His first impulse is to lash out, to defend himself. But he stops. He asks, does this insult truly harm me? Or is it only noise? By choosing not to engage, he robs the insult of power. His silence becomes his victory. The battle was not fought on the screen, it was fought in his mind, and he won. But make no mistake, this war requires constant vigilance. The mind is a battlefield where old habits, ego, and fear launch endless attacks. The Stoic trains daily, through reflection, journaling, and meditation, to remain prepared, like a soldier sharpening his blade. The philosopher sharpens his reason. Each day is practice. Each thought is a test. The tools of this warfare are clear. Awareness. Notice your judgments. Ask, is this fact or interpretation? Pause. Delay reaction. A moment of silence often breaks the power of impulse. Reframe. Turn obstacles into opportunities, insults into practice, pain into growth. Focus. Direct attention only to what is within your control. Let the rest fall away. The weak believe they lose because the world is unfair. The Stoic knows men are defeated not by circumstances, but by themselves. He wins not by controlling fortune, but by mastering his response to fortune. This is the fifth law of Stoic mastery, the warfare of the mind. Fight it daily. Guard your thoughts as a fortress, for once you conquer your mind, you conquer everything. Most men fight against reality. They curse the weather, complain about fate, rage against every inconvenience, as if the universe has betrayed them. But the Stoics saw this rebellion as madness. To fight what cannot be changed is not courage, it is slavery to illusion. The wiser path is amor fati, love of fate, not grudging acceptance, but ruthless, wholehearted embrace of whatever comes. Epictetus put it simply, do not seek for things to happen the way you want them to. Rather, wish that what happens happen the way it happens, and you will go well. In those words lies freedom. The man who demands that life obey his preferences is a prisoner, forever disappointed. The man who aligns himself with what is, finds power in every moment. This is not passivity. Stoicism does not teach you to sit idle while the world crushes you. It teaches you to distinguish between what is within your control and what is not. When fortune strikes, you act where you can, but you do not waste energy on resistance to what cannot be changed. You ride the river instead of drowning in it. Consider a storm at sea. The sailor cannot calm the winds. He cannot command the waves, but he can adjust his sails. He can steer his ship. He can prepare his crew. The storm is fate. His response is freedom. To curse the storm is useless. To use it, to bend with it, to even love it, that is amor fati. Marcus Aurelius lived this law. As emperor, he faced war, plague, and betrayal. He could have cursed his position, envied simpler lives, or raged at the gods. Instead, he wrote in his meditations, a blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it. Misfortune was not his enemy. It was his fuel. He loved fate not because it was easy, but because it gave him endless chances to practice strength. Think of your own life. How many hours have you wasted wishing events were different? Wishing people were kinder, wishing fortune were fairer, wishing life followed your script. Each wish is a chain that binds you to despair. Now imagine flipping that script. Imagine seeing each hardship as training, each insult as practice, each loss as a lesson. Suddenly, nothing is wasted. Even pain becomes purposeful. A modern example. A woman loses her job. She could sink into bitterness, complaining about the injustice, or she could say, good. This is my moment to rebuild, to test myself, to grow stronger. That shift does not erase the loss, but it transforms it into strength. This is amor fati, not denial, but transformation. So how do you cultivate this ruthless acceptance? Draw the line of control. Ask, is this within my power? If yes, act. If no, release. Reframe obstacles. See each challenge not as punishment, but as opportunity for virtue, patience, courage, resilience. Practice gratitude for everything, not just for pleasure, but for pain, for loss, for difficulty. Each one sharpens you. Repeat daily amor fati. Make it your mantra until it becomes instinct. The weak demand that life be gentle. The Stoic demands only that he be strong enough to face life as it is. He bends not from fear, but from wisdom. He loves fate because he knows fate cannot break him. It can only shape him. This is the sixth law of Stoic mastery, amor fati. Ruthless acceptance. Do not merely endure what happens. Embrace it, love it. Turn it into fire for your growth. For the man who loves fate cannot be defeated. Every event, every loss, every hardship becomes his ally. And in that embrace, he discovers a freedom greater than fortune could ever give. Greatness is never crowded. The Stoics knew this, and they embraced a truth most people fear to admit. The path of wisdom is a lonely one, not because it rejects others, but because few are willing to walk so far from comfort, noise, and illusion. The solitude of the sage is not isolation born of weakness, it is separation born of clarity. Most men crave company to escape themselves. They cannot stand silence because in silence they must confront their own thoughts. They cannot stand solitude because solitude reveals their dependence. And so they drown themselves in distraction, constant noise, endless conversation, shallow entertainment, anything to avoid facing who they truly are. But the Stoic turns toward solitude. He knows it is the crucible where the soul is tested and refined. In solitude, masks fall away. You can no longer hide behind the applause of others, the comfort of routine, or the validation of the crowd. You face yourself, your fears, your ego, your weaknesses, and if you endure, you emerge stronger, sharper, freer. Marcus Aurelius, though emperor of Rome, wrote his meditations not to the crowd, but to himself in the quiet of his own tent. Under the weight of empire, Seneca, surrounded by luxury, reminded himself daily that true wealth is the wealth of the soul. Epictetus, once a slave, found freedom not in escape, but in inner reflection. Each of them knew solitude is not absence. It is the presence of truth. Consider a story. A man spends 1 week in silence, away from the noise of the city, away from friends and family. At first, he feels restless, even anxious. But then he begins to see clearly how much of his daily speech is meaningless, how many of his habits are distractions, how much of his identity is tied to the opinions of others. By the end, he realizes he is less dependent than he thought. He returns, not weaker, but with a calm authority that others can sense, even if they cannot explain it. That is the gift of solitude. The Stoics were not hermits. They lived in society, they fulfilled duties, they served others, but they carried solitude within them. Even in a crowd, they remained centered, separate, unshaken. The solitude of the sage is not about leaving the world. It is about never being consumed by it. So how do you practice this law? Make time for silence. Each day, withdraw even for a few minutes to face your own thoughts without distraction. Examine yourself honestly. Ask what drives you, what weakens you, what enslaves you. Solitude reveals answers that noise hides. Detach from the crowd's judgment. Respect others, but do not live for their approval. Their praise is fleeting. Their criticism is powerless unless you give it weight. Carry solitude within, even in chaos. Return inward. Let your mind be your fortress. The weak fear being alone, because without the crowd, they are nothing. The Stoic embraces solitude, because without the crowd, he is everything. He has himself. He has his reason. He has his virtue, and that is enough. This is the 7th law of Stoic mastery, the solitude of the sage. Seek it, not as escape, but as elevation. For only in solitude can you see the world as it truly is, and only in solitude can you see yourself clearly. The sage walks among men, but he does not belong to their illusions. He belongs to truth, and that truth makes him untouchable. You have now walked through 7 laws that the Stoics carried like weapons power as inner control. The wisdom of silence, discipline as freedom, respect through virtue, the warfare of the mind, amor fati, ruthless acceptance, and the solitude of the sage. These are not gentle lessons. They are sharp, demanding, unyielding, but they are the foundations of true strength. The world will always tempt you to live otherwise, to chase applause instead of discipline, to seek control over others instead of yourself, to drown in noise instead of mastering silence, to curse fate instead of embracing it, to cling to the crowd instead of walking alone. But every one of these temptations is a chain, and the Stoic is not meant to live in chains. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the throne is not marble or gold, it is the mind. If you master yourself, you are already greater than kings. If you fail to master yourself, no crown, no empire, no wealth can save you. This is the Stoic throne's sovereignty over your own soul. So the question is not whether fate will test you. It will. The question is whether you will stand firm, whether you will remember that true power is not what the world gives, but what you refuse to surrender. If even one of these laws struck you, hold it, write it, Practice it daily until it burns itself into your life. And if these teachings resonate with you, join us here at Stoic Focus. Subscribe, share your reflections in the comments, and walk with us on this path of mastery. Because Stoicism is not just philosophy, it is practice. It is war fought quietly, daily, within yourself. Dominate your impulses, rule your mind, accept your fate, and in that mastery, discover the only throne that cannot be taken, the Stoic throne.